Hello, this is Dr. Compero. Today we're going to be discussing the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. So this curve can be a little intimidating when you first approach it, but we're going to make it really simple. Pretty much this curve is indicating a relationship between the oxygen saturation of your hemoglobin and the partial pressure of your arterial oxygen. So we've got a y-axis and an x-axis, and on your y-axis we're referring to how much your hemoglobin is saturated. So that is called your SaO2. Literally means how much of my hemoglobin has oxygen connected to it. Now the bottom is the partial pressure of arterial oxygen, so that is PaO2. Okay, so the normal curve is shaped like an S. And we're going to go to the next slide where I have one already drawn, and we'll explain a little bit more about the values. So a normal PaO2 will range from about 80 to 100 millimeters of mercury. A normal SaO2 measures about 97%, but it can range from 93 to 97%. A significant PaO2 change in the relatively flat part of the curve really doesn't do very much to your SaO2. So if you look at the numbers on the bottom, this is your partial pressure. You can see that if you go from a partial pressure of 80, for example, if you increase it to 140, your sats are never going to get higher than 100%. So this flat part of the curve doesn't really do a lot of work for you, and that's how we can have 100% saturation, but not have the best partial pressure of oxygen in the blood that we haven't detected yet. The area that we focus on mostly is the area right here in the middle. This is a steep part of the curve. That means that for a change in partial pressure, you're going to have a pretty dramatic change in your hemoglobin saturation. That's a big deal because we can do a lot of things to bump this up and help this stay up as well. The most important factor in the amount of oxygen that binds or attaches to hemoglobin is the partial pressure of arterial oxygen. So the higher the pressure, the more readily oxygen combines with hemoglobin and via red blood cells. Now at the steep and lower parts of the curve, like I mentioned, this is where PaO2 measures between 40 and 60. In this part of the curve, it's depicting in the body where oxygen is released from hemoglobin to the capillaries at the tissue level due to an increase in oxygen demand. So at this part of the curve, an increase or decrease in PaO2 will lead to a very large increase or decrease in SaO2. So in this situation, when you're in this part of the curve, giving somebody supplemental oxygen is going to really make a big difference. When you're up here, not so much. The problem with giving too much oxygen is that you can get all the way up here, and the saturation isn't going to be a very good indication of your partial pressure because, look, you can get all the way down to a PO2 of 60 and you're still in the 90s in that situation. So that's kind of a false safety kind of situation where you think you're better than you actually are. Now there are a few reference values that you should know. The first one is the P50, and it is referring to this 50 here, and that's the partial pressure at which 50% of your hemoglobin are going to be saturated, and that is right around here. Typically it's about 27 or so in the average Joe. A couple of other ones just to know, a PO2 of about 30 equals a saturation. Let's see, PO2 30 equals a saturation of relatively 60% approximately. And then if you go to a PO2 of 60, that is going to translate to 90. So anytime a patient desaturates under 90%, you know that your PO2 is at least 60 or lower. And that's kind of the take home. Now, the one thing about this curve is that it can shift. And that's important because if this curve was static, we would not have any way of pretty much seeing how we could increase or decrease our oxygen offloading based on demand. So in situations where you need more oxygen, you can shift your curve to the right. Now, look at just the numbers. Let's look at our P50, for example. P50 in the normal oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, it's right here about 27. However, in the new right-shifted one, it's right here at, well, let's say 55 or so. We'll call this one 30 down here. Okay. So, you're giving me the same outcome, 50% saturation. However, with the original oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, you can give me that value at 30, whereas with the other one, you've got to go up to 55. So you, in essence, have a lower saturation proportionally by being shifted to the right. That means you've got to get up to 55 millimeters of mercury just to get me up to 50% according to the curve that I drew. So there are a few things that will cause this right shift, and pretty much the way to remember it is right, rise, release. So what that is in reference to is that things that shift you to the right tend to rise, and then they want you to release your O2. So what are these things? That's a good question. So these things include an increase in your CO2, an increase in your hydrogen ions, which would make you acidotic, increase in temp, and an increase in 2,3-DPG. More on that a little bit later. Other things that will also shift you to the right are hemoglobin S for patients that have sickle cell anemia. So now let's go the other extreme. We're going to shift to the left. Now, just to look at the math again, let's look at the P50. So at the P50, your PaO2 is down, let's say it's about 10. So what that means is that when you get to a partial pressure of 10, I'm already at 50%. So just instinctually, it kind of demonstrates to you that in this situation, we are holding onto O2. And there are different situations where we want to do that. So things that will shift you to the left. I want you guys to remember left, lower, hold. And so things that are lowered, pretty much the opposite of what we just talked about. PCO2, hydrogen ions, so that would make you alkalotic because you have less hydrogen ions. Temperature, and 2,3-DPG. Other things that will also shift you to the left, which means you literally cannot release oxygen to the rest of your tissues, includes methemoglobinemia and fetal hemoglobin and carbon monoxide. We're definitely going to hit on fetal hemoglobin in the next part of this video. Okay, so fetal and adult red blood cells, they're distinguished by the different types of hemoglobin that they have inside of them. So there's hemoglobin F for fetal, there's hemoglobin A for adult. Now the big difference is that hemoglobin let's do this in blue. Hemoglobin F has 4 binding sites, just like the adults do. However, they're 2 different types. You've got 2 alphas, and then in the fetal hemoglobin, you've got 2 gammas. And I'm talking about chains. These are areas where things can bind and connect to your hemoglobin molecule to go around your body. So the adult, on the other hand, also has one with 4 receptor sites, but they've got alphas and they've got betas. Okay, so at about 32 weeks gestation, about 32 weeks, the fetus starts to produce hemoglobin A. And he's got about 25% when he's born. In that situation, the P50 equals 19. So P50 equals 19, which is what I just showed you in this graph right here. So if you were to receive a saturation and you were given a P50 value, you should be able to tell me, are you shifted left or are you shifted right? Don't worry, you won't have to know that for this exam. Now, hemoglobin F, it has a much higher affinity for oxygen and less affinity for 2,3-DPG. That means you're going to shift your oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve to the left. The greater arterial oxygenation in the fetus versus mother is present at any given arterial oxygen pressure. So that means that the fetus is satting higher than the mom if we're looking at any given part of partial pressure. 2,3-DPG binds to adult hemoglobin and it rearranges it to decrease its affinity for oxygen. So it helps with the offloading process. Now, what is 2,3-DPG? It's a organophosphate. It's 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, but we'll just call it 2,3-DPG. And this compound, it prefers to bind with your beta chains. So it tends to leave the hemoglobin alone in the fetus, therefore giving it the opportunity to pick up more oxygen. 2,3-DPG decreases the oxygen affinity of hemoglobin F less than that of hemoglobin A. And that makes sense because they don't bind very easily. The gamma chains do not really bind easily with 2,3-DPG. Therefore, it's taking one less slot on the 4 openings where oxygen can go. So the take home is that the fetus has more oxygen being held onto the hemoglobin per given partial pressure of oxygen. This, of course, changes as you are approaching term, and when you were born, you have to essentially shift yourself to the right, which would be more to a normal physiological state. So hopefully that cleared it up a little bit. If you have any questions, please send me an email at leonardocampero@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.